If you're running a manufacturing operation in Indiana, the governor of the state stood up this week and told you directly that Indiana has an electricity problem and that it needs to be solved fast. This is not a headline to scroll past. Governor Braun specifically named electricity supply and water supply as the two utility challenges Indiana must address to keep pace with its own manufacturing growth. And at the same time, the state is advancing a $560 million water infrastructure program near Indianapolis to serve the industrial district where Meta and Eli Lilly are building now. And Subaru of Indiana in Lafayette is already operating a model that does not wait for the grid to solve its own problems, generating its own power on site with a new rooftop solar array at its Tippecanoe County campus. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through what each of these means for your operation and the questions worth putting in front of your team today. If you're an Indiana manufacturer with expansion plans in the next 3 to 5 years, Governor Braun's public warning about Indiana's electricity supply is a planning variable you need to account for now. The governor stated this week that Indiana faces significant electricity and water challenges that require swift solutions to support the state's expanding manufacturing sector. That language, swift solutions, coming from a sitting governor in a public statement, is not routine, but it reflects what utility planners, grid operators, and large industrial developers have been flagging in IURC dockets and integrated resource plans for years at this point. Indiana's generating capacity and transmission infrastructure are under pressure from a manufacturing growth wave that is accelerating faster than the grid was built to handle. For Indiana manufacturers, the direct consequence of a constrained grid is not abstract. It translates into higher probability of power quality events, longer interconnection timelines for facilities looking to expand their load, and upward pressure on rates, as we've all seen, as utilities pursue cost recovery for infrastructure investments required to close the capacity gap. Now, none of those outcomes are favorable for an operation trying to hold its all-in cost per kilowatt hour steady while running production at or near capacity. So here's what to watch for. IURC dockets filed in the next 6 to 12 months that propose new generation capacity, transmission upgrades, or grid modernization cost recovery mechanisms. Those filings will tell you what utilities are planning to build and what they intend to bill back to you, commercial and industrial customers, who ultimately will pay for it. Here's a question for your team. What are our current and projected electricity demand levels, and have we modeled how a constrained grid with longer interconnection timelines or upward rate pressure affects our operational stability and expansion timeline over the next 3 to 5 years? Now, the state's $560 million water infrastructure program for central Indiana is the clearest signal yet of the scale of utility investment required to support the manufacturing growth Indiana is actively pursuing, and it raises a direct question for every operator outside of that development footprint. Indiana is advancing a $560 million water program specifically designed to provide water supply for the planned industrial district in an Indianapolis suburb where Meta and Eli Lilly are planning major facilities. Meta broke ground on a $10 billion, 1,500-acre data center campus at the Leap District in Boone County in February. Eli Lilly has announced more than $13 billion in investment at that same site. Those are not small water consumers. The infrastructure required to serve them is being built at the state level at significant public cost because the private development scale demanded it. For manufacturers operating outside that central Indiana corridor, the relevant question is not whether the specific water program serves your facility, it's whether the concentration of infrastructure investment in one industrial growth zone is drawing state attention and capital away from utility planning in the regions where your operation actually sits. Water availability and water cost are utility variables that rarely get the same attention as electricity until they become a real constraint. So here's what to watch for. Progress on this water infrastructure program as a precedent. If the model works, it signals how Indiana intends to handle utility provisioning for future large-scale industrial development, and where that leaves existing manufacturers in regions that are not attracting mega project investment. So here's a question for your team. How secure is our facility's long-term water supply, and do we have a clear picture of any anticipated changes in water utility cost or availability in our region over the next, say, 5 years? Subaru of Indiana Automotive's Lafayette campus is now a working example of what on-site power self-generation looks like at a heavy industrial facility in Indiana. And given Governor Braun's warning about electricity supply this week, the timing of this story is worth paying attention to. Subaru added a new rooftop solar array to its Lafayette manufacturing campus in Tippecanoe County, enabling the facility to generate and consume its own clean power directly on site. This is not some press release about some sustainability goal. This is an operational decision by a large industrial manufacturer to reduce its dependence on the grid for a portion of its power load. The relevance for Indiana manufacturers is pretty straightforward. When a governor publicly warns about electricity supply constraints and a major automaker in your state is already generating its own power, those two facts belong in the same conversation. Self-generation does not eliminate your utility relationship, but it does give you an independent source of supply for a defined portion of your load, which reduces your exposure when the grid is constrained, when rates increase to fund infrastructure investment, and when power quality events affect your production lines. The operational and cost questions around on-site generation are real and specific to each facility's load profile, their roof structure, interconnection rules, and their tariff. But the strategic decision is increasingly clear at the industrial scale. So here's what to watch for. Subaru's long-term operational and cost efficiency results from this Lafayette installation, a large-scale industrial solar project in Indiana with documented before and after performance data, is the kind of reference case that changes on-site generation conversations from theoretical to very concrete. So here's a question for your team. Have we done a current feasibility and cost-benefit analysis for on-site power generation at our facility? And if not, given Governor Braun's grid capacity warning this week, what would it take to put that evaluation on the agenda? Today, you're looking at three stories that share the same root cause. Indiana's utility infrastructure is being stressed by the pace of industrial growth. The state is spending $560 million on water infrastructure for one industrial district alone, and one of Indiana's largest manufacturing employers is already generating its own power rather than depending entirely on the grid. Those are not coincidences. They are connected responses to the same underlying constraint. The bottom line today is this: Indiana's electricity and water supply challenges are now a governor-level public concern. The state is committing hundreds of millions of dollars to utility infrastructure for large-scale industrial development in central Indiana, and manufacturers who are not actively managing their own energy supply chain, including evaluating on-site generation, are carrying a growing exposure to grid constraints, rate increases, and interconnection delays that will become more acute as industrial load continues to build in this state. Now, obviously, I don't run your plant. You do that. My real job as CEO of Tactical Energy Group is to stay on top of everything that changes the cost and reliability of your power and the economics of making things in Indiana so we can build the right products and programs for the manufacturing community. But while I'm doing that work anyway, this brief is my way of giving you as much of that insight as I possibly can so you can spend more time running your operation and less time trying to decode your bills, understand rate cases, and interpret headlines. So here are three questions worth putting on the table with your operations, finance, or energy team this week. If you can't answer these, you're making infrastructure and capital decisions without a clear picture of how Indiana's utility constraints directly affect your facilities and your operations. First, given Governor Braun's public warning about Indiana's electricity supply, do we have a current assessment of how grid capacity constraints or future rate increases from utility infrastructure cost recovery would affect our all-in energy cost and our ability to expand load at this facility over the next 3 to 5 years? Do we understand that? Second, is our facility's long-term water supply secure, and have we evaluated whether Indiana's concentration of water infrastructure investment in central Indiana for the LEAP district and similar mega projects affects water availability or pricing in our specific utility territory? You've got to know the answer to that. Third, has our team done a current feasibility analysis for on-site power generation at this facility? And if we have not revisited that analysis in the last 12 months, is Subaru of Indiana, the Lafayette installation, a reason to put it back on the agenda? So listen, if today's brief gave you a clearer picture of where Indiana's utility infrastructure is heading and what that means for your operation, then send it to another Indiana plant leader who should be ahead of these things, ahead of the conversation, rather than reacting to it when it shows up in a rate case or a capital planning document when ultimately they have to pay for it through their bills. I'm Daniel Burke. This is TEG Daily Indiana Manufacturing News, and I will see you tomorrow morning.